All right, how's it going, Neil? So today we're going to be going over how to set up Surveillance Station on Synology NAS. And so what Surveillance Station allows you to do is basically turn your NAS into an NVR, a network video recorder, for a bunch of security cameras. All right, and so we're going to be doing this by hooking up this Reolink camera right here. This is a Reolink IP camera. Just full disclosure, they did send this to me for free. Other manufacturers of cameras have sent me free IP cameras before. In my testing, I've talked about in other videos, I do like the Reolink cameras a lot for their price to performance. That's kind of an unbiased opinion, but they did send me this camera for free. But we're going to be setting up within Synology Surveillance Station. So pretty much what we're going to have is we're going to have the Synology acting like a hub for all of the different cameras on your network. So they all just directly send their video and record to the Synology NAS. And so you can do things like keep retention policies and have everything just on the Synology. It's a really cool feature and it works really well. So what you need to do this is you need to have what's called an IP camera. So an IP camera is a camera that is operated over the network. So this one right here is a PoE camera as well. And so that means that you just plug in a power over Ethernet switch into this thing and it gets its power and sends its data over one cord, which is really nice. And so the majority of cameras today are going to be IP cameras. Though if you get something like a Nest camera, they don't really want you to go outside of the Google brand. And so you just need to make sure whatever it has is either compatible with Synology or is part of this thing called the ONVIF. So ONVIF is pretty much an open source standard that's just, hey, this is a standard for everybody that everybody can use to make security cameras that interface with open source NVRs. And so that way you don't have to worry about Synology supporting that brand or that brand supporting Synology. Instead, it's just an open format, which is so much easier. Everybody can just set it up and communicate like that. Though obviously sometimes there are things that just aren't part of that standard, which are cool features that you otherwise could not do over ONVIF. But if you get ONVIF, you're good to go pretty much. The other thing to think about when buying cameras is H.264, H.265. So H.264 is a much easier video to process, but the file sizes are larger for the same quality. H.265 is a proprietary standard. I believe they both actually are, but H.265 is very expensive, and so a lot of web browsers actually do not support H.265 because of this, because it's too expensive to license out. And so because of that, when you're interfacing with H.265 cameras over the DSM web interface, you are not able to see a live video feed out of it because Synology cannot guarantee that your web browser will be able to play it. It's an annoying thing, but there is still a solution. Both macOS and Windows both have Synology Surveillance Station clients, and you get way better performance out of it anyway. And so you can always use that, and you can use that to see both H.264 and H.265 video. All right, and so now enough on that. I'm gonna go ahead and plug this thing in, and we're gonna go through the setup process for it. All right, and so now I've just gone ahead and plugged it in, and the first thing we need to go ahead and do is boot up our DSM. And so I'm using my old NAS right now as a test bed for this. And I did want to quickly talk about a little bit of disclaimer about ext4, different volumes and things like that. So security cameras write continuously to a NAS, which means that if you've got spinning disks, that is continuous writes on those spinning disks. And that means that if you are trying to do other stuff as well on the same volume, you are going to have fewer IOPS or operations per second. Your disks are going to feel slower if you're trying to use this NAS for other things as well. Say you're going to be having more than like 5 cameras, and Surveillance Station is only half of what you're using the NAS for. You want to use Surveillance Station for your cameras, but you also want to be able to use the Synology as a file station and get 10 gigabit speeds and things like that. Well, in that case, that's not a bad idea to go through and actually get a NAS with multiple bays and choose one bay, just get like a 16 or however much storage you want to keep, terabyte hard drive, and plug it in and have that one be the surveillance drive itself. So this way, it's constantly writing to only that one drive, and so the rest of the pool does not have that IOP overhead on it either. So this way you can have the best performance for both worlds, and they'll be independent. So having a lot of security cameras will not slow down the rest of your NAS. Now, one other thing is when you are setting that up, if you're going to be just having a surveillance station drive, then I would recommend setting up for ext4. That's pretty much the only reason I recommend using ext4 is if you're just using it for surveillance station and just for security cameras. Because ext4 does not have the checksums or anything that BTRFS does, so it is faster. And the other thing is, it's not like surveillance station data, security camera data. It's not like it's something that's super critical 24/7. Really, surveillance station or security camera data is only really required when something happens and you want to go back and look at it. And so if a drive fails, which is unfortunate, it's probably not going to fail at the exact same time that a break-in or something happens. And so you can go through and just say, okay, you know what? The drive failed. I'm going to go plug in a new one, start it back up, and there you're fine. But if you did really worry about having 2 copies of your data, you could run it in a RAID 1. But in my opinion, it's very unlikely that both of those things would happen. So I would recommend just having it be a single drive and saying, you know what, it's okay. All right, and so now let's just go ahead and set up Surveillance Station. So the first thing we're gonna go ahead and do is install it from the package center. And I did also need to add in one additional disclaimer because Surveillance Station is not free. It is free to use, but licenses cost money. A license is a per IP camera license. So every single Synology NAS, except for the specific NVR models, have 2 free licenses. Those licenses cannot be transferred to another Synology, but they come with 2 free licenses. And for most home users, honestly, that's probably all you need. Front door, back door, whatever. But then licenses past that cost money. I think they're about $50 a license, which is not cheap. But one really nice thing about them is those licenses that you purchase independently follow you. And so that means that if that NAS fails or if that camera fails and you go and you're like, okay, I'm going to replace the camera or the NAS, you don't have to pay that license again. Anytime you update to a new NAS, your license just follow you. And so that's one thing that makes it actually a pretty good deal in my opinion. So if you take something like, let's just say the biggest competitor probably would be Unify for this. So Unify does not have any license fees, but you have to buy Unify hardware and Unify cameras to use the Unify Protect app. It's very good and rivals Synology Surveillance Station, but if a Unify camera fails, now you're out that license cost because the license cost is really built into the cost of the cameras. The Unify cameras are way more expensive than any other camera on the market because they have that proprietary software built in. Every single camera, in a sense, is the camera and the license in the price that you're buying it. And so that is one thing to think about when you're choosing between Synology Surveillance Station and Unify Protect. Is Surveillance Station, you can buy much cheaper cameras and you do have the licenses carry with you, while Unify has no license fees, but the license fee is really built into the actual cost of the cameras. That's just my 2 cents on the matter though. It's kind of looking at which one's gonna be cheaper over a long term. All right, and so now that that has installed, we can go ahead and open her on up. And we'll see it actually opens in a completely different portal. And so it's really designed where you can go through and set up on your own system and have it be where you've got guys who only have access, who only know of the NAS as a security station. And there's also a new beta out for the new surveillance station, which has a lot more new cool features specifically for large enterprises, but it works pretty much the same. And so it's going to tell you Google Chrome's the best bet for what you've got. It's just what they're testing with. The other thing is you really, if you're going to be doing this a lot and going to be looking at a lot of IP cameras often, it's not a bad idea to just install the software directly on your machine because it's able to use your GPU for acceleration as well as multi-threading on the actual computer. I had a company who actually had 16 cameras that they needed to be able to scrub through at like 15x speed. And it absolutely hammered the local desktop CPU with 16 cores in it. It was incredible that it was using the entire thing just to play back that footage. And we almost saturated a 10 gigabit cable. It was huge. They just wanted to be able to play through the entire day very quickly. And so it was just absolutely hammering both the GPU and the CPU because one CPU was not enough to handle the entire thing. But we'll just go ahead and say out of that. And now it'll take us through it. That's why you're watching this video, right? So now let's just go ahead and kind of do a quick walkthrough of it. So pretty much your IP cameras are here. This is where you configure every single one of them. If you're just doing this with a few cameras, it's just easier to do it manually one by one. But if you're doing it with a ton of them, they actually have the ability to add batches. And so you can actually add in like from an Excel file or a CSV. And so it's really easy to go ahead and set this up where it will search the entire network for all the different cameras that are compatible with Synology and just go through and add them in very quickly. They're making it a lot easier to add a ton of cameras in, especially also with the new Surveillance Station beta coming out. In this case, it didn't find anything though. So the first thing we need to do when we're adding in a camera is we actually need to go through and open up the camera and just find its IP address. And you really want to make sure you've got it set to a static IP address on your router. So what you want to do is pretty much find the IP address of the camera. I always open up the router page and see which devices are connected and find the camera. Then go through and check the box that says DHCP reservation, static IP address, whatever on the router. And so this way, every single time your camera connects, say your router reboots or something, and the camera connects again, the router will give it the same IP address every single time. And so that will make your life a lot easier, and you're never having to change the IP address of the cameras because the address never changes. And we'll just go ahead and sign in. For Reolink, default is admin, no password. If you're not going to be setting this up on a VLAN, I would highly recommend at least changing the password. Oh, and here is the lovely setup in my office. As you can see, I'm still moving in. It's still quite bare. And the other thing is, this is way worse quality than usual due to the fact that I grabbed this camera out of the garage and it was very cold in the garage, and so now the camera is fogged over. But yeah, so this is the camera. It's actually a zoom camera, so you can actually go through and zoom on in. And just like that, it's zoomed in. All right, and so now you've got to go through, and every camera is going to have a little bit different settings for how you need to set it up. So most setup can be done through Synology, except you want to make sure to create, in some cases, an account. And so with the Anakey cameras, you actually need to go through and create a Synology account for every single one of the cameras. And that's the one that you say, okay, they're allowed to sign in with the ONVIF format. And it's very nice to have that because you know security-wise that only those logins work. And it's just easy. I do that in a large environment. If you're just home and you're sticking on a different VLAN, it's up to you. It's the worst case that can happen is somebody gets access to your security cameras. And so it's really up to you. I'd say if they're able to get into your network like that, you've got other problems though. All right, and so now for this, for Reolinks, we actually don't have to do anything. So we'll go ahead and just back out of this. We'll just copy this IP address right here. And so now we'll open back up Synology Surveillance Station. We're gonna hit add camera, and we'll just do a quick setup. And we'll just call it something. I'm just gonna call it the 511. Give it an IP address. And we're actually gonna go ahead, and in this case, we can call the brand Reolink. And if you're using ONVIF, that's the ONVIF one. And now just choose your model. So this is the 511. And so now we get to choose pretty much basic setup. So we'll just go ahead and type in admin for the username and no password, which is the default. And you can choose the video format. This camera is only H.264. And so one other thing that a lot of cameras will have is they'll have H.265 and H.264, but really the H.264 is like less than standard def, terrible footage. So it's really just an H.265 camera. And so now once you've got that set up, just go ahead and hit test connection. It should turn green and you should see an image. And so that means everything just worked. And now we can go ahead and hit finish. It's going to go through and activate. The other thing I did fail to mention is if you did have multiple volumes, you would need to select which volume the actual surveillance station data was stored on. And so let me just show you that really quickly. It's actually a pretty cool feature of DSM that you can do this really easily. So to change volumes, you just go into control panel, open up shared folder, and you'll see which one of the volumes every single shared folder is on. And so you can just click on it, hit edit, and then if you had multiple volumes, you'd be able to just select it down here and it would migrate the data over for you while everything's running. I've done it a few times. It's really cool that it can do that, but I would recommend setting it up before you actually set up your cameras if you do have that single volume. Now it's going to go through and it's still activating. They can take a little while. And then eventually it will just go ahead and open. And so now we can go ahead and set up some settings for it. We'll just go ahead and select it, hit edit, and we will go into the video settings. And so here you've got a lot more customization here where you can set up whatever you like. So the first thing we're going to see is we've got obviously the same settings, the video and audio style that you'd like, but then we also see these stream profiles. And so stream profiles allow you to kind of have the camera broadcasting two different formats that Synology can pick between. So for example, you can record in lower definition when nothing's happening, but then once motion occurs, switch over to high definition and have those as two different streams. And so you can set that here. You can see that the Reolink has two different streams. Some cameras don't, some cameras only have one, some have a lot. And so you can kind of change the different stream profiles. But in this case, I believe with the Reolinks, the second stream profile is just very low definition. So we're just gonna leave all of these at high quality. Now you go down to the actual stream resolution and stream things. So the first one you see is resolution. And a lot of people will be tempted to make this ultra, ultra, ultra high quality. And whenever you're choosing this, you really need to think about what kind of resolution you need and what kind of frame rate. So these are the settings right here that will go through and have massive performance impacts on your camera stream. For example, if you choose to go 30 frames per second, you are going to just be dumping way too much data to your NAS. And so it's going to fill up way quicker. And now you can only store data for maybe 3 days. And maybe even you need another volume because it's just hitting your NAS too hard. And so the first thing I always cut down is the frame rate. 8 to 10 frames per second is great for surveillance station. For a security camera, think about it. You're not trying to shoot a Hollywood movie. You are going through and you really just want to make sure that if something happens, you can identify what happened, right? And so if you need to, go ahead and set the resolution and the stream and then go out to where the camera is and go as far away as possible and just move where you'd expect the person to be at about as fast as they are. There are sites that'll actually show you the difference between frame rates, but in general, 8 frames a second is probably a good place to start. And then you need to do the same thing with the bitrate and the resolution. So the combination between the resolution and your bitrate is pretty much your quality. So if you turn down the resolution but have a higher bitrate, you'll actually have a clear image in some cases. So what you really want to do is you really kind of want to figure out what you need. So the thing I always tell people to do is go through, find the smallest thing you need to identify and set the resolution where you can identify that thing. Then from there, you know, okay, I don't need a 4K camera. I don't need to be dumping that much data to the NAS because it doesn't get me anything. I can still read everything I need to be able to read. Instead, if you want more, go for a higher bit rate. And so it's really about just kind of figuring out what you need for your setup because it's going to change based off exactly where you're putting the camera. If you're expecting a ton of motion, and say you have something like a bunch of palm trees swinging in the shot on windy days, and maybe it's raining, all that stuff is very hard to compress. And so what you'd probably want to do is you'd want to have a higher bit rate for things like that. And so it's all about trying to figure out all the different scenarios where you'd need high bit rate and what kind of bit rates you would need. It's a lot of tuning. And so just kind of figure out how everything looks and download the footage. That's the best way to do it. So now we'll go ahead and open up advanced. And you've got the pretty much unnecessary things here. I never have to change anything here. And so now we'll just go ahead and go down into the recording settings. And so you've got a few different options here. You can record always. So basically just continuous recording during all times. And so that's going to take up by far the most amount of data, but it's a normal security station. Then you can also have it set up where, okay, during this time, only record during motion settings. And then you've also got 2 customizable streams as well. And so you've got a lot of different options here for how you want everything to record. And so what you can do is you can have higher quality recording when motion occurs. And so you go through and you set up your streams here. This actually goes through and is kind of mapping the internal streams that we saw up here in the device settings, these high quality, balanced, low bandwidth, to the camera streams. And so it's kind of confusing. It's kind of a mini to mini map. But pretty much what you do is you first go through and you use high quality, balanced, and low bandwidth to match what your camera can do, because there's so many different things that a surveillance camera can do. They go through with Synology and they just break it out to 3 different categories: high quality, balanced, and low bandwidth. And so once you have those 3 settings, you can then go through and map those into the specific Synology settings here. So that's where it's kind of confusing, but I just leave these at defaults a lot of time. Then you can go through, set up your schedule. So you can say only record on motion the entire time. That's going to let you store data for a very long time. And you can say, okay, anytime there's an event, go ahead and record 5 seconds after and 5 seconds before. But we can go through and we'll just set up continuous recording because we have the space for it. And then we'll go ahead and say that we want to keep all files within 30 days. The other option is I only want to keep the archive for 100 gigs. If you've got a lot of cameras and you're like, all right, I want to make sure I've got 80% volume, go through and figure that out, and then you can kind of see realistically how long you've got access to. Maybe you've got a camera that needs a higher bit rate because it's got a lot of motion and it's a very large resolution, a large part of your house. Then you can go through and give that more preference than a camera that needs less resolution. It's a lot of tuning here and just kind of figuring out what you need. Then we'll just go in here, and then here you've got the option for when you want to go through and truncate video. So truncate video means splitting up the video clips, specifically so that you just don't have one massive clip in case there's any kind of corruption or anything like that. You can change it to longer. 10 minutes is probably fine. The longer it is, technically, the better performance you are going to get. But the difference between 10 minutes and 30 minutes is not going to change really anything, but it will go through and give you just smaller video clips to choose in between. And these are the ones you're going to download. You can also go through and just finally, if you want to go through and have your own organization system, maybe you want to be able to dump these files and read them all later, you can set up a specific archive format. But if you're just going to be using Surveillance Station, you don't need to. Then you've got your live view settings. So this is changing the stream profile for when you're actually opening it up. So maybe you want, if somebody's watching it, the stream, to have a higher quality stream. And then when you're just recording, it doesn't really matter. So you've got all those different options here. And so it's a lot of customization. Then you've got your time server stuff. A lot of this stuff I would leave as camera settings because cameras are tuned for their very specific capabilities. And so it tends to work the best, though you can try out if a camera is acting up, go through and give your exact camera a configuration. Like maybe it's always overexposing and the UI sucks. So you can do it here. And finally, we'll go ahead and save our changes and go into event detection. So this is where you can go through and have events. So Reolink cameras have the option for people detection for some of them. So the 511 has people detection. And so it's got its own algorithm that is going to be better than the Synology algorithm because it's optimized for its own camera. I would test out both of them. You can either go for the camera or the surveillance station. And so this way it's when is a event. So Reolink, it's, hey, a person or a car, there's a bunch of different options. Look at your one. And you can just choose, okay, if the camera says there's a person, that is an event. Then if you've got a NAS with a GPU built in for this, which is those custom surveillance NASs, you can even do face detect to say, okay, this person was here when. You only do like 1 or 2 of those tasks because it's a very powerful thing on the GPU, but that's where you would do it if you had one of those advanced NASs. And so now we'll just go ahead and save on them. So now we can go through and we'll just see it is continuously recording. We'll just go ahead and open up the live view to see everything. And so here we can just see a live stream of the camera. And I'm going to turn that off so there's not feedback, but you can see that the Reolink has a microphone, so it works. You can also go through here if it's a PTZ camera or just a Z camera, zoom, you can go ahead and zoom in. Just like that. Then if you have multiple cameras, you can have multiple layouts and you can really set up however you'd like to. And so this is where you can just see the cameras very easily. Then we can go through and we'll go ahead and open up the actual timeline. So our timeline is going to be very, very, very short, but this is where you can go back through different times and just open them up. And you can even be seeing multiple streams while this is happening. And so you can also go through and speed everything up. There's a ton of options here, but this is where you actually see all the different camera feeds from past time if you're trying to figure out what happened. Then if you need to go through and actually download a recording, you can go through and hit download on it. And you can even download specific parts of the file, which is really nice. Oh, nice. Sometimes macOS does not like to play back these videos, and so you just need to do a convert on them. And so you can just see, boom, we've downloaded the video if you need it for whatever.
It's going to fill up way quickly.
And so if you needed to go through, and if you need to see a highest quality, this is where you see it. As you can see, I'm absolutely blown out here because this is about the worst case scenario for a dynamic range test of a camera, because it's seeing the regular lighting in this room, and then it is seeing all the lighting on me for the video setup. And so really that's all there is to it for this basic config. There's so much more stuff you can do with this, and I'm probably gonna wait till the new beta comes out just because it's got a lot more features in there. But Synology Surveillance Station is such an easy platform to use for actually handling all your different IP cameras. All right, well that's gonna be it for this tutorial. Go and leave any other tutorials you'd like to see me make in the comments below, and have a good one. Bye.